The mini spoiler season sails on, as the Legends of Runeterra team has now revealed the new champion from Bilgewater in the upcoming expansion to the Call of the Mountain set, known as Monuments of Power, which is set to release on October 14th. The new champion is Tahm Kench. There were also some more new Bilgewater cards revealed in addition to Tahm Kench, and everything shown looks pretty interesting. In this video, we'll be talking about Tahm Kench and the new cards shown today, and I'll be giving some additional thoughts on what types of decks Tahm Kench could bring about. Before we jump in, if you like this type of content and want to see more, be sure to hit the like button and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss out on any future coverage. I'll just go ahead and say that the theme around most of these cards is based on the sometimes forgotten capture mechanic, which has only been exclusive to Demacia up until this point with their Detain spell, and hasn't received any additional support since Foundations, the base set of cards we've had since the beginning of the game. These are going to open up some very interesting possibilities for decks focused around capture strategies, and now that Tahm Kench has been revealed, the abilities on the Bilgewater cards shown yesterday start to make a little more sense, but we'll get into that later on. Let's talk about Tahm Kench first. So Tahm Kench is a 4 mana 2/6. Round start, create an acquired taste in hand. Level up, I've captured 3 or more units. When I level up, obliterate my captured enemies and release my allies. Tahm Kench at level 2 is a 3/7. Round start, create an acquired taste in hand. Attack, obliterate my captured enemies and release my allies. This is very cool. I've actually been a long-time fan of the capture mechanic. Detain was always a card that I was experimenting with in many different styles of Demacia decks, from Lux Heimerdinger to even different takes on Bannerman decks. So to see a champion have a capture ability that's actually pretty good when you take Tahm Kench's stats into account is a pleasure for me. I love that Acquire Taste is cheap, since that makes it a lot easier for Tahm Kench to level up. That said, I think the types of units you'll be targeting will depend on the other region that you're running. If your second region doesn't have any healing or other ways to protect Tahm Kench from dying, you're probably going to be resigned to targeting units with a low power stat to keep Tahm Kench's health high. But if you're running a second region that is good at protecting its units, you can target bigger units that still won't one-shot Tahm Kench, and use healing and other protection effects like stat buffs, barriers, and even spell shield to keep Tahm Kench alive after using an acquired taste. Because of that, I actually think the best region to pair Tahm Kench with is Targon, because Targon has healing spells like Guiding Touch and Star Shaping, and they have other cards to protect your units like Bastion and even Blessing of Targon. The other big reason to run Tahm Kench in Targon is because you get access to Hush. The reason why is because if you use a unit to capture another unit, if your unit gets silenced, the captured unit will never come back and is gone forever. It's basically obliterated. And Hush targets champions, which means you can hush your own Tahm Kench if your opponent targets him with something that will remove him. Demacia is also another candidate thanks to its barrier spells and Detain, but I don't think Demacia will be quite as good, especially since Purify can't hit champions. Ionia is actually a possibility as well, but I'll go into more detail on Ionia when we talk about Tahm's champion spell. The team did show off Tahm Kench being paired with another Bilgewater card, Hunting Fleet, so you can capture the golden narwhal that your opponent gets, and it won't deal too much damage to Tahm Kench, so that might be something worth exploring. As far as pairing Tahm Kench with other regions that don't focus on healing, Noxus still might be a decent candidate with Vladimir, especially given the units that were shown yesterday, along with the Bayou Brunch spell shown today that ties all the self-damaging abilities they have together. I'm not as convinced about Vladimir as I was yesterday, but there's still a chance it could be okay. Next, let's talk about Bayou Brunch. So Bayou Brunch is a 3 mana slow spell that reads, an ally captures another ally and gains the captured ally stats. As I said, this is Tahm Kench's champion spell, and this spell is the reason why you'd run all those other Bilgewater units that were shown yesterday, like Boxtopus and Lounging Lizard. I covered those cards in yesterday's video, so feel free to check that out if you want more perspective after watching this video. Being able to capture your own units will prevent them from dying, and you'll buff up the stats of the ally that's doing the capturing. But another benefit you get from this card is that if you can level up Tahm Kench, the allies you captured will be released and they'll all come back at full health. The reason why is because all those units like Crusty Codger, Boxtopus, and Lounging Lizard only deal damage to themselves when you drag them directly from your hand onto the board, not when they're summoned or resummoned through another card. So you'll potentially have a pretty beefy board in that scenario. This is also the reason why I mentioned earlier that Tahm Kench has potential with Ionia if you're looking to pair him with both Bayou Brunch and all those other units I just mentioned. And that's because of a little card called Retreat. If you use Retreat on any of those self-damaging units, you can use the return spell you get from Retreat to replay any of those units for 1 mana, and they won't take damage when they come back into play because Return is summoning the card, not the player themselves, even though the unit is coming from your hand. Ionia is also pretty good at protecting units with cards like Spirit's Refuge and Twin Disciplines. But Bayou Brunch will very likely be a core card for anyone looking to play Tahm Kench, especially if you plan on playing any number of those other Bilgewater units that were revealed yesterday. It's pretty cheap to play as well, since it potentially doesn't dip into your regular mana pool at all, which is always a plus. Let's talk about Wisefry next. So Wisefry is a 6 mana, 3/8 with Overwhelm and Vulnerable that reads, play, deal 1 to all other allies, and grant me +1/+0 for each of them. So this card is a little weird, but still pretty interesting. It somewhat reminds me of Scarmother of Rinna from Freljord, which has the same stat line with Overwhelm, but has to take damage herself in order to buff her power stat. This is more reliant on you having a board, but I still think Wisefry's ability is better than Scarmother of Rinna, since Rinna almost always requires you to play additional cards to be effective after you've played her. This is just a one and done ability. Wisefry having Vulnerable is a little weird. I guess it's a fine drawback since 8 health is a lot and most decks can't one-shot units with 8 health. But I'm usually not a fan of units that have Vulnerable. It really brings down the value of that 8 health. At least it can fight for the board somewhat when it is inevitably pulled by one of your opponent's units, unlike other units such as Ice Pillar. This will definitely see experimentation in Vladimir decks looking to use Bilgewater as their second region, but it might end up holding a spot in Tahm Kench decks in general. It can be pretty strong, even if you only have 2 other units in play. And finally, we have Shakedown. This is a 1 mana burst spell that reads, deal 2 to an ally to grant 2 enemies vulnerable. This card seems really strong. In fact, when I first saw it, I thought this was the strongest card they showed today. Shakedown is definitely the most flexible card in this group, because it probably has even more potential outside of Tahm Kench decks than within Tahm Kench decks themselves. At least some of the units you'll be running will already be damaging themselves when they come into play, so having to deal 2 more damage to something in your Tahm Kench deck just to play this might be too big of a cost. I honestly see more potential in Noxus decks like Vladimir possibly, or even just other mid-range decks that focus on big units. Maybe Sejuani or Trundle when paired with Swain, since Shakedown contributes to Swain's level of condition, and Sejuani or Trundle's abilities help to mitigate the damage this card does. By itself, Freljord lacks board control effects in general, and you typically have to pair it with Noxus for a Frostbite deck, or Shadow Isles for some type of control deck. So a card like this that grants Vulnerable permanently, which is an ability that your typically big Freljord units can take advantage of, is a real treat. And that's all I've got for now. I hope you enjoyed this look into Tahm Kench and the other Bilgewater cards that were revealed today. If you did, feel free to leave a like, as it really helps me out and gets this video out there to others in the community. If you don't want to miss future coverage of the new set from me, subscribe to the channel, and don't forget to hit the notification bell below to make sure you know when the next video goes live. Feel free to check out the other Legends of Runeterra videos that I have on the channel, or even the other places you can find me on the internet. You'll find links to my Twitter, Twitch channel, and our community Discord that you can join as well in the video description below. Thanks for taking time out of your day to watch this, and I'll see you next time. Take care.